I think it's clear the worst of all is modern, high-yield, semi-dwarf wheat. That is this thing concocted essentially in a laboratory in the 1960s and 1970s. It looks different. It stands about 18 inches tall. The stalk is very thick. The seeds are very large, and the seed head is very long. And yield per acre is greater. And that's why it was done. It wasn't created to screw with us. It was created to increase yield per acre for farmers. And it did. Typically 4 to 8-fold more per acre than traditional strains of wheat. But that is, when they changed it so dramatically in appearance and biochemically, they changed the effects on humans. One of the effects, for instance, is farmers wanted better resistance to pests, like molds and insects. And so they selected strains of wheat that were enriched in wheat germagglutinin. Not gluten, but agglutinin, meaning agglutination of blood clotting. And so they had modern wheat is enriched in wheat germagglutinin, but wheat germagglutinin is a very potent bowel toxin. And it also has other toxic effects in the body. So they've increased it. They did it for pest resistance, not to screw with you, but inadvertently made it much more toxic, the modern wheat plant. Likewise, phytates. Phytates are also pest-resistant compounds in wheat and grains, and they show strains with greater phytate content. But phytates, we know, bind minerals in your gut, like calcium and magnesium and iron and zinc, and you poop it out. And so that's why there's a lot of iron deficiency anemia, particularly in females. It's odd that it affects females more so than males. So it's very toxic and causes mineral deficiencies. They change the structure of the gliadin protein. That's the thing that drives autoimmune diseases. It's the thing that gets partially digested to 4 or 5 amino acid long peptides that go to the brain and stimulate appetite. It's an appetite stimulant. So modern wheat is so different, and inadvertently they amplified the toxicity. So that's the worst. Little less worse would be traditional strains of wheat, whether it's the wheat from 1950s or the wheat from 19th century, or even if you go way back in the Middle Ages or biblical times where you had strains like emmer or einkorn, very different. So the traditional wild-growing wheat einkorn is a 14 chromosome plant. Modern wheat, high-yield semi-dwarf, is 42 chromosomes. To illustrate what that means, so Jesse, as a member of the Homo sapiens species, has 46 chromosomes. I have 46 chromosomes. Your listeners have 46 chromosomes. But modern wheat has 42 chromosomes. The traditional ancestral form of wheat, 14 chromosomes. Very different. So traditional strains, of which there are hundreds of different strains, a little less toxic. We go way back to emmer, and then einkorn, the original strain, a little less toxic. We go to other non-wheat strains like barley. Barley and rye are essentially identical in wheat genetically. They're closer than humans are to chimpanzees, so they're very, very close. So those are almost just as toxic as wheat. Then we get into the other grains. People don't think of grains this way, but they're promiscuous. They're genetically promiscuous, so they share a lot of genetic traits. So grains that aren't all that popular, like millet or triticale, still share some of these effects, but we're getting less and less harmful. We get all the way down to the most benign, which is rice, because rice, a lot of the adverse effects of grains come by proteins, because we're unable to fully digest a lot of the proteins of grains. Rice is about 1% or less protein. It's mostly sugar. But that highlights the problem with rice, that it's mostly sugar. And of course, more recently, it's been found that rice is a concentrator of arsenic. So such products as rice milks, often given to children, are very toxic. So I believe the USDA is contemplating banning them. And so, but there's no place in that spectrum where we could argue grains are good. There are various shades of less bad. It's kind of like low-tar cigarettes, filtered cigarettes. Do we get to a point where we've removed the tar and you use a filter and now cigarette smoking is healthy for you? So not really. Small quantities of rice are probably safe. Small quantities of grains like millet, probably okay. It's when they become dominant. But if you get to the most toxic end, like high-yield semi-dwarf wheat, those are really toxic. Personally, if I get exposed to a breadcrumb, I'm not exaggerating, I get quite ill for about a day. I have a daughter-in-law who's got celiac disease, it takes just a spoon that contacted maybe a roux or gravy with a little bit of, and she'll be sick for about a week. She's got joint pain, abdominal pain, diarrhea, and other things. And so it's a reminder just how toxic it can be. So a lot of us who've been wheat and grain free for a number of years, you go to a restaurant, you ask them, I'm gluten free. We have to use that terminology, right? Because restaurant people don't understand wheat and grain free, and they get confused by the gluten free thing. As you point out, gluten free foods are horrible. They're horrible because they're typically made processed gluten free foods with cornstarch, tapioca starch, potato flour, and what I'm blanking this fourth. Cornstarch, rice starch, tapioca starch, and potato flour. And those, so wheat products, because of the amylopectin A carbohydrate, raise blood sugar higher than nearly all other foods. The only foods that, among the very few foods that raise blood sugar even higher, cornstarch, rice starch, tapioca starch, potato flour. So people who say, oh, I'm doing your program, and I gained 30 pounds. And my abdomen's gotten really big. My blood pressure went up. My triglycerides went from 150 to 350. Are you eating gluten-free? Yes, I am, of course. Gluten-free processed foods are criminally bad for you. Yet they're often touted as being healthier for you. They are not healthier. They have a different set of toxicities, but they are definitely not good for you. Unless it's a naturally gluten-free food. If it's an avocado, it's gluten. Oh, that's great. If it's a piece of pork chop, gluten-free, that's great. So naturally gluten-free is fine. It's what the food industry calls gluten-free. Baking mixes, bagels, cake mixes, all that stuff. That's the bad stuff. It's very destructive.
You mentioned the fact there your daughter-in-law reacts terribly as a celiac. You said yourself you react even to a little bit of wheat or gluten. You can specify. But are you celiac too?
I think I am. I've never had formal testing because I follow the lifestyle anyway. And you know what they say? If you want to be tested, you have to re-expose yourself for several weeks to generate positivity. Well, if I went back on wheat, I would be sick as a dog. I would have skin rashes. I'd become a type 2 diabetic, as I was many years ago, not anymore. Gastrointestinal distress, abdominal pain, anxiety, panic attacks, small LDL particles, coronary disease, high triglycerides, fatty liver. In other words, in order to prove it to myself, I'd have to destroy my health. And now, thankfully, a lot of that's reversible. Not all of it is, though. So, if you generate coronary disease because of a big spike in small LDL particles, that's what the amylopectin A of wheat and grain does. So, ironically, Jesse, we were told cut fat, eat more healthy whole grains. That is a formula to generate heart disease. And yet no one's apologizing for that. That science is quite well sorted out, by the way. It's not my speculation. That science has been sorted out and has been corroborated numerous times, starting with such people as Dr. Ron Krauss at University of California, Berkeley, and other groups. They have shown that it's the consumption of wheat, grains, and sugars that is a huge provocative agent for the formation of small LDL particles, the real cause of heart disease. That LDL cholesterol is a crude indirect marker for. We can measure small LDL particles and other factors that cause heart disease. But pharma doesn't make money from it because there's no profit-making drug for it. When you start to do the real test for heart disease, by the way, which is just lipoproteins, and I use the NMR, nuclear magnetic resonance lipoprotein testing, it becomes immediately obvious that heart disease is a disease of diet. It has nothing to do with the need for drugs. Nothing to do with it. So that's why they maintain this fiction that you must treat cholesterol. This crude, outdated marker that should have been abandoned decades ago, because it's such a lousy marker, it gives the appearance that you need a drug to reduce it.
If you enjoyed that clip, press here for the full episode. I'll see you over there.
It would be hard, Jesse, to find diseases, modern diseases, that are not either initiated or exacerbated by the microbiome. Look what we're doing with reuteri, reduction of skin wrinkles, vaginal moisture, boosting testosterone.